Hello, everyone. So great to have all of you on board. And I would like to invite you all to this webinar on the whole person approach for coaching. My name is Vikrant, and I will quickly give you a little look I'll quickly introduce you to this webinar. I'll introduce you to our speakers. But firstly, this webinar is brought to you by Inspire One. Inspire One is one of the leading firms that offer organizational and leadership solutions in India. We've got around more than 2 decades of experience in the consulting domain, and our solutions they are offered around leadership development, culture change, productivity, customer centricity, and sales performance. We've got a wide group of network with 3 global partners. We've got our coverage, which is beyond 55 countries, around 300 plus clients that we work with, and more than 6 lakh people we have inspired through our initiatives. So about this webinar, let me quickly introduce our speaker. Our speaker today is Ms. Suman Sethi. Her experience spans over 22 years in leadership and people development. She has worked on amazing initiatives on culture change, top team collaborations, coaching for leadership impact, emotionally intelligent leadership, and high performance behaviors for leaders at various levels. She's also a certified PCC by the International Coach Federation. Now I would like Suman to take this ahead and go ahead with the webinar.
Thanks, Vikrant, and a very good evening to all of you. And like Vikrant said, it's great to have you all on this webinar. I know it's the end of the week, but rather than looking at it as the end of a really long, tiring week for all of you, I'd rather look at it as the beginning of the weekend. And I do hope that together in this 1 hour, we are able to create a good start to the weekend. I will very quickly share with you the objectives of the webinar, but before that, also wanted to give you an overview in terms of how we plan to cover this. So one is, of course, sharing with you what does the whole person approach really mean, and also share with you some experiences, or based on based on the experiences that we have had, why are we talking about the whole person approach, and why is it different from what is available already. So that's going to be the intent. What I will definitely try and do is that I will use as many examples as we can, actual cases that we have worked on, so that it's not just at a very cognitive or a platitudinal level. It is actually coming from empirical evidence that we have had, and also a lot of research that is happening at the moment. So that's the view. Also, at any point in time, if any one of you have a question or even a thought, it'll be great if you if you just kind of mention it in the chat box. It'll help. And if those are questions or inputs that I can share at that point in time, I would really be happy to do that. If there are questions that we don't have the time to answer, then we will definitely do that offline. So having said that, I am going to now move to, broadly what are the objectives that we are looking at. So one, of course, is at a starting point, really talking about why is coaching much more than a cognitive process. So there is a way in which coaching has been approached in the past 3 decades. There have been immense amount of models, frameworks, processes that have come up. We have gurus of coaching who have spoken about how these processes can enable development of leaders, etc. And a lot of these have been cognitive models, and we'll talk about what the cognitive model means, and also why we think that it is a little bit more than a cognitive process. We will then also talk about why is the whole person required? Why is it that we need to engage, the coach needs to engage in the whole process, and the participant or the person who's getting coached also needs to be engaged in the whole process. um, just for the purposes of the rest of the webinar, I would like to just say that when we talk about the person being coached, we would refer to the person as a client and not as a coachee, because the word coachee really doesn't I think it's not I believe it's not a regular word, but we've been using it quite a lot, the entire industry. But what we will refer to in this webinar is the word client and not coachee. We'll also then talk about what does the whole person coaching actually mean. So we would have established that it's more than a cognitive process. We would have spoken about what does it mean, and what we will then do is talk about what is this approach and what does it entail. And I think at this point, what I also want to say is that it's something very simple. So it's not something that will be earth-shattering in any way. I think intuitively at some level, all of you would have experienced it, thought about it, felt it, but it's not something that's really got its place front and center of the coaching process, and that's what we are attempting to do over here. And then, of course, I'm going to not do case studies separately at the end of it, but I'm going to run the webinar with the case studies over there. So let's look at the first piece and see why is it more than a cognitive process as it has been attempted so far. So to begin with, I'm just going to share a few coaching, future trends in coaching, and these have come from the Coach Federation as well as ICF, as well as a lot of other coaching associations that participated in this survey. So 89 and I think over 25,000 people responded across about more than 100 countries to this survey. Um, so one of the things that almost 89% participants or respondents to this survey are saying that leadership development programs will, as a core concept, include coaching going forward. So though we have made that whole movement from just, from having events and workshops, we've moved to the concept of having journeys, etc. Journeys entail, whether we have VILT sessions or we have in-person sessions, we have group coaching, we have action learning projects, etc. But in addition to that, now most people and organizations believe that by 2022, all these journeys or programs will include coaching as a very integral part of it. Professional coaching for millennial leaders is going to increase intensely. So that also means that coaching is going to get its space even at the mid-level leadership, not just at the senior level, but even at the mid-level. Of course, the way it's delivered and so on and so forth will have to relate with or be contextualized to the millennial leaders. But the fact is that coaching will be used for that leadership team. A leader as a coach will become more prevalent. So we are hoping that from, just that it's almost like a dream that, all our leaders within organizations would have the coaching way of managing teams, inspiring teams. And that's something that a lot of organizations have been concertedly working towards in terms of the coaching culture and, other such initiatives. Uh, but it does, like any other new culture change, it does have its own impediments. But it seems that by 2022 we would have apparently dealt with a lot of those, and that will become more prevalent. Team coaching will increase, and which is also a critical trend, because team coaching is one area where probably that whole person coaching that we are talking about will have a lot of relevance, for the reason that when we look at any kind of team process, we talk about, again, things like teams getting together and systemic thinking and people not just sticking to their turfs, etc. So all of that is done really well, and all of us facilitators and coaches talk about how critical it is to build trust and so on and so forth. But a lot of times the real issues of relationships, of the fact that some people just don't get along very well at a personal level, or just because there are some strong biases that exist in the team, and they are not very often surfaced. So again, we deal with the team coaching and getting people together and collaborating, but we still deal with it in a very sanitized way. There is a little bit of fear or trepidation of really walking into the real issues of relationships, biases, past experiences, and so on and so forth. And over there, therefore, the whole person coaching really brings in a lot of value. And also, the big one, and for me, this is, as a person, and I know a lot of you also would have similar views. Uh, the fact that through coaching we can also enable and influence social change, I think, is really heartening for me, because if there was ever a time, in our known history, in our known past, that we really need some positive social change to happen, I don't think there was any more relevant time than we are in now. And if you believe that this tool can actually help influence that change also, and the change will come through, again, leaders at various levels in various organizations, then I think that's the real power of it. And again, that kind of coaching can certainly not happen at just the cognitive level. It will need a lot of other layers to be working on. So, looking at the trends and looking at the fact that all of you would have been in some way associated with coaching, either as a recipient or as a customer or as coaches themselves, I'm not going to preach to, it's like preaching to the choir to say how important coaching is or what value it creates. But I would like to, talk about a certain data that we have, or a certain data point that we have, and I'm sure you all have also experienced it. We all know that the credibility of coaching is really huge. We all know that the numbers of people getting engaged in it are huge. Organizations are taking onto it, and so on and so forth. But even so, almost 70% of coaching engagements don't achieve their potential. So we're not saying that they're unsuccessful completely, but a lot of them don't really achieve their potential. So the question that I'd like to pose and get your views right now is, and it'll be really nice if you share your thoughts or responses to this in the chat box, so that we can also get everybody's thoughts here. What, according to you, could be, are the reasons in your experience for why coaching engagements may not be meeting their potential? Again, we're not saying that they are all unsuccessful or 70% of them are unsuccessful, but what we are saying is that there is a much larger potential which we're not able to achieve. So just, your thoughts on why you think that this may be happening. Uh, and really request all of you to share your thoughts and views. You can either unmute yourself and share, or you could write in the chat box. Um, and I am really stubborn. I don't move on till I get some responses. So really urging everybody to put in their thoughts. Okay, so we have. Okay, so Ashish says that it could be the methodology which doesn't enable, it to be completely successful. Anand is talking about apprehension on the part of the client against sharing true issues, which is actually, yeah, it's a great barrier, because a lot of times, depending on the political environment that exists in the organization, people are a little unsure. um, Srinivas is talking about failure to practice and implement learning from coaching. That yes, we do get inputs, but do we really go back and apply? Ownership from the coachee may not be there. Uh, Most subjects addressed through coaching are behavioral, and it is difficult to measure behavioral change. So, how does one determine success? Absolutely. Um, Absolutely. And I think all of these that have been mentioned over here are really big and real barriers. In fact, it's interesting that one of you mentioned the fact that the client or the coachee over here may not be very comfortable sharing their issues, the true issues, depending on the environment over there. And another person Subhash is mentioning over here is that at an organizational level, it may be very sporadic and not continual. Yeah, it's, we've experienced it in a lot of organizations that coaching is also, like a lot of other initiatives, taken up as a flavor of the month. There is a new person who's come in, there's a new leader who's come in, and they, and he or she believes from past experience that it works, and we should start it. But then people keep moving, structures are fluid, and the agenda just kind of moves along with the person who started it, and it doesn't really get roots over there. In a lot of cases, Manoj, you're right, it is also seen as a negative process. So in a lot of companies, the way coaching may be presented maybe as a corrective process rather than a developmental process. And then people feel like they've been picked out, or the spotlight has been put on them, and so on and so forth. And obviously then the motivation to do that is not very high. And building on one of the things that one of you mentioned, which was not being able to share their true their true issues or true concerns, there is research that now also points out to the fact that um, uh, high potential and high performing people, so people who not only have high potential but have been consistently performing well, also need to be put through a coaching process or a process where they can anchor with somebody, for the reason that they are actually living with a lot of pressure of expectations. So, a lot of times people feel that, they're performing well, and they are they're doing so well, they have great potential, they've achieved it all, and they're set and they're all sorted. But actually a lot of those people are under a lot of pressure because they have to keep living up to those expectations that have been put on them, and very often they're showcased as, this is how you should be. So yes, all of these and for them to admit that they need help is very difficult, because you can't be seen as showing that. And a lot of times, Chandni is mentioning that the client may not be aligned with the coach. Absolutely, they may not be a very, the thought process, the wavelength may not match, and that may be a barrier. Absolutely, I'm delighted to get all your responses over here. So you're right, there is a big elephant in the room, and the fact is that we get so enamored, or we get so caught up with the more tangible part of the process, that it's easy to ignore the elephant. But the elephant is really seeking to be seen and seeking to be addressed, because without that, and if you're only looking at it as a linear process, it's not going to really work. So like all of you said, there is a conundrum of issues that impede coaching engagements. At the lower end of the spectrum, it is just because leaders will turn around and say, oh, I don't have the time for this is asking for too much time commitment and I can't do that. And very often what that means is not just the time that they are going to spend in the actual coaching engagements or the sessions, but also they feel that they won't have the time to implement whatever has been whatever they've agreed to or committed to. The biggest reason for that is when a coach and a client is uh, not able to look at the coaching output as business as usual. If they are going to position it as something in addition to what the person is doing, then time will always be an issue, and naturally so. So it's also the skill of the coach to be able to talk about whatever needs to be done, dovetailed completely to business as usual with the person. It's completely imperative to be to do that. A lot of people will not get too much out of coaching because they will deny the feedback from the environment. They will always have reasons for why certain feedback has come, and they will always talk about attribute cause externally, and that's one of the that's one of the biggest things that we see in a lot of clients. Also, linked to that, it is the belief that the rest of the organization needs fixing. So if only I had a better team, if only my peers were, a bit more amenable to how things need to be done, and they followed my thinking, it would all work. May not be very clear on the areas of development. And I have to share with you a very interesting case, that really talks about this. So this was, we had to coach the head of a center, uh, uh, which was part of a global organization, and this was a shared services center that had been set up by this person. And it was a brilliant achievement, because in just a matter of 18 months, the person had managed to grow the center from 8 people to about 1,700 people, had managed to put the processes in place, the facility was in place, and everything had grown exponentially and had grown well. They were getting really good input, feedback from their global customers, which were in-house customers, but even so, they were customers. Now, the manager of this person felt that it was a time now for the person to also start focusing on the long term, and not just focus on the operations and here and now, but also be able to look at long term strategy, long term view. What is it that we are going to get? And so that was given to us as a mandate. When we met the manager, gave a lot of examples of how this person is really brilliant at managing crisis, getting things done, operations, transactions. But the manager felt that, is not able to really look at transformational change, or is not able to build the vision for the future for the center. Are we still going to, are we going to continue to offer the same services? Is there something else coming? Are we going to get, artificial intelligence integrated, and so on and so forth? And when we met the client, he also said that, yes, whatever my manager says, I think he's right, and let's work with it. And for a moment we thought, oh wow, this is great, this is awesome. The manager and the client are connecting, and the client agrees with whatever the manager says, and so on and so forth. And we went into the coaching process and started it. But in the very first meeting, what I realized was that though there was this agreement with, whatever the manager says, we should do it, but there was no understanding of what is it that the manager actually wanted the person to do differently. So the person knew that, the manager is saying strategic thinking and transformational change and so on and so forth. So understood all those words. But what did it really mean for this person? Or what did good look like? Or what is it that this manager wanted this person to do differently from what the person was doing now? The visual of that hadn't been made clear. So this was like, monologues that were happening with the coach. So the manager was talking to us and the client was talking to us, but even though both of them were talking every week on, reviews, etc., they had not really gotten together about what is the coaching objective. And because both of them were conflict averse, they didn't even want to get into those discussions. It was good to just kind of, skirt the issue and get into the process. um, and when we realized that, we insisted that, the visual of what good looks like needs to be clear. Otherwise, let alone uh, the buy-in from the person, there is no alignment on what you want to achieve. How will we know that the coaching has been successful or not? And just that very little fine tuning right at the beginning to say, let's get a visual of what you want, made all the difference then to the engagement further. And if I was to really look at it just as a cognitive process, we could have really gone ahead with it without doing that, because, the process is very clear. You talk to the person, you understand, you tell the person, okay, go back and, get feedback, and then we will work on it. And it could have gone to some level, but would it have really achieved what the manager wanted to or the client wanted to? I'm not so sure. um, a lot of people are not motivated to put in the effort, and that's what really also attributes to I don't have the time, or denial of feedback, etc., because the person is not completely in alignment with the fact that he or she needs to be coached at that point in time. And that buy-in cannot and should not be created by the coach, because the coach is a partner for a specified period of time. The coach cannot give the motivation to the person uh, to change or to work on certain developmental goals, especially in the arena of executive coaching. You can do it for life coaching, but not the arena we are talking about. And so then, therefore, does the coach have the gumption and the conviction to kind of put that on the table and say that unless that issue is addressed, we don't believe that the process should be started. That is the role of the coach. But the coach can't be expected to create the motivation. The motivation has to be something that the manager and the client do it. There are a lot of leaders who are just simply abrasive and reticent. They're like, um, I don't really think anything needs to be done. And they would, to any kind of process that's happening in the coaching arena, they would be abrasive about it and so on and so forth. Again, the history of it would go back to what are their relationships internally, what has been allowed, because a lot of times culturally, we allow a lot of people to get away with abrasive and belligerent behavior because as an organization, we are afraid to lose a person who is a high performer, star performer, but is abrasive. The pressure of numbers is so high that we are short-sighted enough to just focus on what that person is producing and lose sight of what that person is destroying in not letting others also be as productive. And that can be a big impediment. A big part of the elephant that is ignored or that is not acknowledged is the fact that any person at any point in time will be going through some kind of relational, situational, or emotional challenges uh, at any point of time. It is very difficult to find human beings devoid of having certain, prevailing conditions which are either emerging from a certain environment that they are in, or a certain situation that they are in, or a certain relationship issue that is ongoing, or not having the emotional maturity to deal with certain situations that do keep coming up as a part of our dynamic environment. And since that is not taken into account, a lot of times, again, coaching engagements can be purely sanitized and, very transactional. There are, I think, out of the coaching engagements, at least I have personally worked on, I believe about 80% of them would not succeed because certain relational issues uh, between the client or client and the manager haven't been addressed. So very often we get mandates on coaching where the manager says, just fix this person in this way. This is the kind of person I want. This is the template I want. This is what I do. It works, and this person is not able to do that. So please create this persona or this avatar of this person which is fixed and will do what I need him or her to do. Over there, the relationship is definitely suspect because obviously the manager is wanting a replica or a clone of himself or herself, and that is not what most people would like to end up being. Everybody has their own ways of working. And if there is a relational issue that exists between the two people, if they're not willing to come together and review, or if the manager is not willing to support this person, and just wants this coach to come in and fix this team member and give him back to me, it's not really going to work. And then, of course, we have situational challenges which may have happened because the person was expecting something that didn't happen, and so therefore is coming in a little bitter or a little resentful. No matter how much you play up the glamour of coaching to say, hey, you've been specially nominated or specially selected, it's not going to work because there is something deeper inside which is bothering the person. um, and again, not preaching to the choir, but it's not just that all these will be an impediment to the leader, but they will also be an impediment to the growth of the organization. So is coaching largely a cognitive process? Yes, it is. I think whichever model we look at, it starts and progresses very similarly. So there is a business strategy. To enable that business strategy, there are certain competencies that are required. Leaders are very often assessed on those competencies. These could be through tools, through EI tools, through psychometric tools, through 360-degree assessments. It could be through, just the feedback that the manager is given. Based on that feedback or those inputs, competencies that are specifically required for a leader are chosen, and they said that, okay, these are the areas the person is not doing really well on, and then that is converted into a learning goal, and what is the business impact that this goal should achieve. And then of course there are these very fancy mid engagement reviews and final reviews and mini surveys and major surveys that will happen, and so on and so forth. Very simple to do, but it doesn't end up being that easy, because while all of this is happening, there are a lot of other dynamics and variables that are working in the system with the client, with the manager, and so on and so forth. Uh, so it is so far seen as a cognitive process, and these processes are great because they're well thought through, they're logical, nothing wrong with the process, except for the fact that it is only focusing in a very linear way on one part of the person. However, there is another part that we also need to look at. So if we are not going to just want to limit it to being linear, we also then have to see what is this whole person that we are looking at? What is this non-linear person that we are looking at? So we will still begin with the business strategy. We will still say, okay, for this business strategy, these are the competencies that those are required. We will still assess where those leaders are vis-a-vis those competencies. We will still identify which are the competencies that the leader needs to work on. And please remember, this identification is only happening basis the tools and the feedback that the person has achieved. So far, the client himself or herself is not part of the process in terms of their own inputs to it. So of course, yes, they will give inputs to their 360-degree if that happens. However, in most cases, when we are doing the 360-degree, people will say the right things of, yes, if my stakeholders feel like this, then I'm sure it is, something I need to work on. But the buy-in isn't really there internally, because there is this denial to say that, no, people have a grudge against me, and so on and so forth. But this process is the fundamental process that still needs to be followed. So we are not going to fiddle around with this. However, if at this point we then just jump into the coaching process to say, okay, all of this has been identified, now let's start meeting, and we are going to have 6 meetings, and at the end of it, these competencies should be developed, and so on and so forth. Then I'm sorry, we are really, going to end up not being very successful over there. So what needs to be taken into account at this point in time, or in the first couple of engagements that we have with the client? There is an innate nature and a leadership preference, right? So the strategy says that we need leaders who are able to, who are really good at strategic thinking, who can create these scenarios. They can create, plans for various scenarios, because the world is changing so fast, and so on and so forth. Yes, we need those competencies, but we also know that the innate nature of some people is not such that they are naturally inclined to be long-term thinkers. So in the thinking spectrum, we will always have some people, some of us, who are innately much better at, here and now, operational things, crisis, and are fabulous at doing that. And that skill and that behavior is also required. But innately, we may not be so aligned to, or we may not prefer the long-term thinking. It doesn't come to us naturally. Now, if that is not taken into account right at the beginning, then we are wanting the person to work at something that's going to be that much more difficult, because it's not a preference. So what do I mean by acknowledging that the preference is not aligned with what the goal is? What we mean by that is not saying that this person can't do strategic thinking, but understanding and realizing with the person that this is not an inherent preference. And so therefore, let's recognize that you may need to work really hard to develop the skill, because it's not coming naturally to you, which means that you have to seek out opportunities where you need to build this skill and this behavior. and which means that you will be under some amount of stress, under some amount of anxiety while working on this, because it's against your natural grain. And you also at that time make the choice available to say that, all of us have a choice to say, is this the kind of work that I want to put up? Is this something that I really want to become good at in the long term? Is this the kind of leadership role I want? And if that is clear, then let's set about working on it. Then the motivation is clear. But if we feel that, oh really, I'm okay with what I have right now, and I would be very happy to have roles like the ones that I have already, I don't think I would like to get into this whole strategic thinking thing. um, and so you take a call over there, and so much of angst and so much of pressure and so much of discomfort for the person gets addressed right there. That needs to be looked into right at the beginning. Does the person have the innate preference and the motivation to work on that? There are emotional profiles that people have, right? So a very interesting example again that I'd like to share over here is that we worked with a consulting firm, one of the big fives, and there was this person who was doing exceedingly well at at the mid senior level, so manager of managers, that doing really well with whatever the deliverables were for the team and so on and so forth. And we and but his manager said that if he has to work if he has to get to the next level, and I think he can be developed to head a certain vertical also over a period of time, but he needs to improve his relational skills. He needs to be not as abrasive as as he is with people. And we got into the whole engagement process, and the person turned around and said, he said, I'm doing really well, I'm achieving the goals, I'm obviously able to do it because I'm able to inspire people to meet their deliverables, etc. And I don't understand the need of this relational thing. I mean, I've not had it forever, and I don't know why I need to have it now. Fortunately, we had done an AI profiling tool for him, and one of the things that came up, it was really interesting, was that in the social skills and the social awareness section, his empathy was very low, his interpersonal relations were low also, but his group orientation was touching the roof. It was at a 10. So which meant that his orientation towards the goals of his group, the team that he was working with, was so high that he was probably one of the highest contributing members in that group. So would put the team's agenda ahead of his own agenda, and so on and so forth. And he was delighted to see that. He said, see, I am oriented to the group, things are happening, so why do I need to change any of this? And we had a conversation around that, and I said, but why do you think your empathy and your interpersonal relations are low? So he says, I don't care, because despite that, I'm doing so well. And what we realized was over there was the classical approach of, if I can focus on the results and get things done, why do I need to focus on people? And so what we did was, we told him to go and get feedback with people who had been working with him for about a year, and also get feedback from them to say how much would they look forward to working with him. We also got him to take feedback from people who were in other teams and find out how much would they like to be part of his team, because he was a high performing leader. And what he found out was that the people who had been working with him for about a year or so were not very keen on working with him in the future. People from other teams were not very keen on joining his team, because the spoken repetition was that he's an abrasive leader. He will help you to achieve your results for a period of time, but after that, it's very difficult to take his way of working. And that's when he realized that, in the short term, having that focus on results is really great. But if I don't work on my empathy and my relations, I will not be able to, really make the growth that I have the potential to. And that realization is what created the motivation for the person. Again, like I said, the current relations that people have with managers, teams, peers, impacts the current situation of the organization. So if there is a little bit of a turmoil in terms of uncertainty of movement, and where will the person go, what's going to happen, that can be a big factor. the current personal situation of the person. Maybe that's not the right time for him or her to start with the process. And then, of course, how much is the person willing to be working on the feedback that the person gets. So how self-aware is the person? What are the kind of biases that the person works with? So leaders are fraught, not just leaders, all of us are fraught with a lot of biases that we work on. And these biases need not be the gender and the race and the age biases. These can be biases which are cognitive in nature, confirmation biases, sunk cost biases, basically biases that help us to, form our views and our decisions. Now, if the coach is not able to also work through those biases or help the person identify that, these are the biases you're working with, unless all these things are addressed, it will remain a very limited success of the engagement. You may see some change, but it's not really going to be very sustainable. And that's what we mean by the whole person approach. You can't just limit it to, this very logical process of these are the competencies, how are they coming in. The coach and the client have to continuously also keep visiting all of these arenas and consider the whole person. This is a model that we use for organizational performance as well as for individual performance or leader performance. Performance, environment, and behavior have a relationship which is two ways, and performance will always get impacted by whatever is your internal environment and your external environment and your behavior, which comes from your biases, your own self-awareness, your own way of working, your emotional profile, etc. So all of these are going to impact the final performance or the results that one gets. And it's a cliche of what made people successful till a certain level will not take them beyond that. But that's really very true because early on in our years, if we just focus on the functional competencies, etc., people can do really well. uh, but beyond that, there's much more. And I'm glad there's much more to that because, if there wasn't, then, then I think artificial intelligence and the technology and so on and so forth would take over very quickly. If it was as simple as a logical cognitive process as what we are looking at, because then that would mean that there is no human dynamic to development. It's just that you make that template, people go through it, and it happens. So I'm glad for all these human elements because that's what makes the whole development richer and also sustainable. um, on the positive side, so I'm not just going to talk about the fact that organizations are a little bit blinkered and not addressing the elephant in the room, but on the positive side, we do have a lot of professionals now who are able to focus on these issues also. They don't remain just on the surface. There are some leaders and organizations who have the courage now to address this elephant to a large extent, and those are the ones where coaching very rapidly moves and creates that sustainable development. And the fact that the whole person needs to participate is something that's also coming into being. There's a lot of global research that is also talking about it. So there's an interesting thing that I wanted to also share over here, is that there was a lot of research that had happened about, so does this mean that we are now looking at the process not just being coaching, but also some kind of counseling that's coming in? Because these issues, if they're personal issues or if they're relational issues, then normally people go in for counseling for that. And traditionally, and very rightly so, experts of coaching and counseling have always said that no, these are two very discrete things. You cannot get into the mode of counseling when you're coaching because it's a different skill. It addresses different issues. So we shouldn't do that. And so therefore, there was this midpoint which was unaddressed. So, okay, we can't do counseling while we are coaching, but we are still saying that these issues, which are very human issues, do also exist. So what are we going to do about it? Uh, that is where the whole research really started, that there are these boundaries. They should be there because all coaches are not skilled enough to be counseling and so on. So what do we do? Um, so So what we do is that we do take the cognitive coaching processes, because that is the coaching framework. There are ethics around that, but we also add to it something that is called psychological mindedness, which is not counseling, which is just being very aware of what is it that is happening in that situation vis-a-vis that person. Is it something that can be addressed through this process? Is it something that needs to be looked at differently? So psychological mindedness simply means that we try and get the coachee's whole motivation. We try and make it his or her choice. We also work on the aspects of relation and self-awareness, and we look at coaching for the development of competencies. We look at coaching for the development of behaviors, of capability, etc. But we look at the psychological mindedness to work on things like effort, inclination, and motivation, because those are what will decide whether the person actually develops on the competencies we want them to develop. Otherwise, we will always end up with the issues of, I don't have enough time. Great, I commit to doing this, but I didn't have the time to do it in between. I don't know why I should do it. My manager is asking me to do it. I don't think I need to do it, and so on. Unless we look at the effort, inclination, and motivation as a very integral part, sustainable change is not really going to happen. So my question to you over here, again, I'd like you to use your chat boxes. When you just look at this phrase of psychological mindedness, and with the background that it's not really counseling at all, because we cannot cross that line. That line is really firm and clear. What, according to you, would be psychological mindedness? What, according to you, what do you think will come under the arena of psychological mindedness? So waiting for some of you to give your thoughts on it. Um, I'll give you a hint. It's not something very complex. It'll be probably the intuitive response that you've got in your head will probably be the right one. So don't overthink it, and don't feel that you need to make it complex. Um, Yeah, so Subhash says, please define psychological mindedness. Absolutely, we'll do that. Aspirations and willingness to take that the coachee has solutions within himself. Yes, that is definitely, in fact, that's the whole premise of coaching, that the coach shouldn't be giving solutions and should be able to get the solutions out from the person. And that process requires something more than just, the cognitive way of doing things right now. So what is, so if we say that psychological mindedness is that input, then, how would you define that? What would you think that it is? It really entails ability to self-reflect and introspect. Absolutely. Absolutely. Any other thoughts on this? Like I said, intuitively, you will all know what it is. It's not rocket science. It's not something that only comes out of research. It comes out of human experience and our own experience. Uh, so yes, psychological mindedness is as simple as a trait which enables reflection, feelings, and behaviors. Another question over here: who do you think should have psychological mindedness, the coach or the client? Who needs to have this trait? It's an essential trait because we've looked at the whole person. For the whole person, we need this trait of, you know, reflecting and so on. Who needs this? Yeah. So some people have already responded. Yes, both need it, right? If the coach doesn't have it, the coach will not be alert to any of these things coming from the responses that the person is giving. And if the coach is not alert to it, if the coach is not, focused on it, the questioning will go all in the, not in the right direction. Um, and and the client needs to have it, because if the client is not yet convinced about, that reflection has a huge role to play in development, or the client is not willing to look at the feelings or the emotions or whatever is coming out of it, it's not going to work. So very often, as an example, a lot of us at Inspire One work with psychological mindedness intuitively, because We've done a lot of work around emotional intelligence and so on and so forth. So even when we are not required to pick up these things, they kind of, come staring at us in our face. So we know that, we know we can bring that process or that trait into the coaching process, but we are met with two kinds of situations mostly. One, where the client will be willing to pick up the cue from there, will be willing to experiment, will be willing to reflect and try out these things. But we also very often end up with clients who would not be either willing or ready to do it. It's just not something that they're comfortable with, or they've never done it, or they don't believe in it. They feel it's not a very tangible thing to do, etc. Now, there are two things that can happen with those kind of clients. One is that the coach can, through his or her skill, be able to showcase to the person that there is benefit in doing it, there is value in doing it, and the client may pick it up. But you also will end up in cases where the clients are just not ready to do it, just not aligned to it. And the right thing to do at that point, the ethical thing to do at that point, is not to push the process further just because an engagement has been signed up, just because an investment is being made. A lot of times the right decision is not to go ahead with the process, because you know intuitively that this is not going to go beyond a certain point. And that's how important psychological mindedness is. It's only when you have that do you have the conviction of either knowing whether it will be successful or not successful. So for us, that's the first time a couple of us came back from coaching engagements, and in our internal review we said that we don't believe, and there was a set of leaders, 6 7 leaders in an organization that were undergoing coaching, and we felt for the two of them that they will, they're not ready right now, they're not ready to look at the other issues that could be impacting positively or negatively. And we came back and said in the project review that, we don't feel that for these two people, we should continue. Obviously, everybody on the other side flipped it. So the organization that was involved flipped it. Our own leaders flipped it. And, how can you say that you can't do it? That's such a failure of that. So are we saying that coaching doesn't help, and so on and so forth? And then internally there will be political repercussions to it, that two people are not getting coached and the process was stopped for it. And we held firm and we said that it's better to deal with those issues than to just pay lip service and move ahead with this. It doesn't really make sense. Over a period of time, we are happy to say that you don't meet with so much resistance anymore. Interestingly, psychological mindedness comes from the work that Carl Jung and Murray had done a long time back. It's been used in counseling and it's found its roots very well in coaching. And it helps to keep the boundary between counseling and psychological mindedness really clear. And there is there is a simple filter to this. Counseling will deal with disorders, which are clinical disorders, and if you end up with a client like that, then of course you refer to the right professional. Psychological mindedness will deal with contextual issues that exist for the person at that point in time. It is not for disorders, depression or paranoia that person is going to be working on. So therefore, what does this mean? Very simply, what it means is these three things. It means that we have to look at development a little differently. We can't just look at it as it's logical, let's do it. We have to bring in the aspect of the whole person, like we've spoken about. The coaching relationship is especially very critical, because unless the coach is able to provide that safe environment, is able to provide that trust, uh, no client is going to open up at that level. So how does that happen? I think a very clear understanding with the organization and the client that the coach will not be giving views and feedback on the person to the organization. The client will do it. So the person who's undergoing the coaching engagement is the person who's supposed to give any kind of input or feedback, or whatever is the progress, back to the company. That is not the role of the coach. In the coaching relationship, the coach should be, and the client should be, very willing to make that relationship emergent. It can't be cast in stone. So if it started with a certain agenda, It can't just stick to that agenda and ignore what is happening at that point in time. So a lot of times your coaching sessions with the client, when we are doing longer engagements, may not be to do with, so if I've started, for instance, on, with somebody on strategic thinking, etc. There may well be one session that I go for where the where the client is really stuck with the current situation, which has nothing to do with strategic thinking, but it's a big issue for the person at that time, big challenge. It's incumbent on the coach to then also be able to address that with the person at that point in time, because it's obviously weighing really heavy. And then, of course, you come back to the main agenda. But in the coaching relationship, there has to be that kind of flexibility and support that's available. And that also means regulating the client's growth in that context. So the growth that you're looking at cannot be just, strategic thinking was what we signed up with, so I'm not going to talk about anything else. You need to be able to regulate, what the client wants at that point in time. So it's real time, real issues that are that need to be looked at. So if I was to look at all of this, in summary, because I do know that though we are done with the first part of the beginning of your weekend, I do know that the rest of the weekend beckons you. If I was to look at it in summary, what we are basically saying is coaching deals with human beings, and so therefore it has to be a human process. It's great to have a logical process to it, but the content, the actual engagement cannot just be, restricted or watertight to as we have known it. Coach and the client have to be allowed to get their antenna a lot more sensitive to other things that may be impacting. And only if the whole person can be brought into the coaching engagement do we believe that the huge value that is put on coaching will be attained. Only if the whole person is engaged, and the onus lies both with the coach and the client to do that. There are a number of case studies, number of cases that we have worked on, and we'll be very happy to share those with you. And we will, for those of you who are interested, we will have them sent across to you. I would, be happy to take on questions if you have any right now. If you'd like to just put them in the chat box, or also we can get back to you with those questions. So I just like to give everybody a couple of minutes to put down any questions or thoughts that you have, to which we can either respond now or send you responses offline. So any thoughts, any questions, anything that you'd like to know more about, we'd be happy to respond to that. So there is a question that says that, does that mean that a coach has to be trained on this psychological mindedness? Is there some training? Uh, there isn't any formal training that a person needs to undergo, or there isn't any formal, inputs on therapy or a 101 on psychological mindedness. It is very, it is something that a coach has to be made aware of. It is something that the coach has to recognize, and more it is becoming part of the training that coaches are getting for their certification. So what is very important is to have coaches who've had this exposure, that it should be a whole experience. Coaches who are empathetic. So it's all about being able to pick up not just what the person is saying, but also pick up what the person may not be saying, but is very relevant to what we are doing. Okay, great. I think we are at 5, and I will let all of you, I will, I would let you go. There are a few questions that have come up, and we will respond to you offline, certainly. And Thank you. Thank you for being part of this process. And very soon, uh, also would like to let everybody know that we'll be coming up with another, part two of this series, where we'll delve a little deeper into how psychological mindedness works to make things, more successful and sustainable in the process. So that'll happen sometimes early December. We will let you know about that. And thank you all very much for being part of this. And we do hope you got some value out of the time that you spent here. And have a great weekend. Right. Bye.